Hello, this is Socially Triggered, and this video is going to be about discussing the minimum wage and an argument against the minimum wage and why the minimum wage is such a harmful thing for the poorest of people within our society. So the minimum wage, the whole concept of the minimum wage is to give people a livable wage. The idea is that if you increase the minimum payment that people receive as an hourly wage, that will somehow bring them out of poverty and give them the opportunity to be able to afford the basic essentials of life. However, the funny thing about the minimum wage is it actually has the opposite effect. Now, I'm going to explain how the minimum wage actually works against the poorest people in our society. Now think of it as a situation as before and after. That you have before minimum wage and after minimum wage. Now, one of the things that you have to do in order to understand the impact of minimum wage is to understand the concept of supply and demand. Now, typically, it is the case that the supply of jobs is actually less than the demand for those jobs. So in that case, what ends up happening is when you have a huge demand for jobs, well, it works in the opposite of normal supply and demand. With a huge demand, actually the price goes down in this case. Because normally with supply and demand, if the demand is high, the price goes up. Well, when you're seeking a job, it actually works in reverse. Because if a lot of people are applying for one job, well, they can lower the price of that job because they have, maybe the first 100 people might not accept that price, but maybe that 1,000th person will. So the point is, if there's a huge demand for a job, you can actually lower the price of that job because you've increased the pool of people that you can go to in order to fill that job. Now, certain jobs you can't do that with. If you think about it, like the CEO of McDonald's, well, there's not that many people that can fit the criteria of that job. So even though there's only one job available, which means that there is no supply. It's just one job, and there's a huge demand. Everybody would like that job. Well, the funny thing is that job requires such a high level of talent that even though the demand of the number of people that are wanting that job is very high, there's only a few people that actually can fit that role. So the demand is actually less than the apparent demand. So it's only a small talent pool that they can use to get that job filled. So it becomes that the job has to go up in price because the demand is just, it doesn't meet the number of people that need to fill that job. There's not a million people you can go to that can do that job. Only a small select few have the talent and skill to do that job because it's a very high skilled job. So that has to be understood in order to understand why the prices of jobs go up and down. The harder the job is to fill in terms of the talent that you need to fill that job, the more valuable that job will become. It will be just a higher price. Now, minimum wage, to put this in the context of the minimum wage is one of those things where it's generally jobs that are very easy to fill. They're simple jobs. They're McDonald's jobs. They're Burger King jobs. They're jobs within, like sweeping floors, janitorial jobs. They might be demanding physically, but they are not something that requires a heavy education or requires a lot of work to be able to achieve the skill set that's required to do that job. That being understood, that job is pretty accessible. There's a huge supply of people that can fill that role. Let's go back to the situation of before and after. So if you think about it, when there's no minimum wage, those low-paying jobs, which are the simplest jobs, will have a huge talent pool to choose from. And they can pick people, anyone that's willing to do the job, and you can set your price. You can say, I'll pay you a penny or whatever. whatever it is, some small fee. But you have to pay people. That's basic. Now, if you put the price too low, all of a sudden what happens is only the pool of people that are willing to apply for that job gets smaller and smaller because nobody wants to work for nothing. So the point is, when you narrow that pool, but you only have a few people, even if it's a really simple job, you've narrowed the pool of people that can actually apply to it because of the price. So the price determines the size of the number of people that will apply to a job. So that's very important to understand. The price of the job will increase the number of people that will apply to the job. Okay, so now we go back to the situation of these minimum wage jobs. The minimum wage jobs are ones that anyone can do, and it's usually the people that are usually applying for these kind of jobs are the poorest people in our society. They have little education, little skills, little things to really help them get out of poverty. If they had the skills and if they had the talent, if they had the education, they wouldn't be poor, okay? Because they could apply for higher paying jobs and they would have the talents that are necessary to get those higher paying jobs. So usually the poorer people in our society are the ones that can't necessarily move out of poverty because they don't have the talents that are required to move them out. That's very important to understand. So now you got this situation. You got, even with these simple jobs, you have to apply a wage to it. Let's say it's $2 or $3. The more, what'll happen is as you increase that price, the more and more people will start applying to it. Now, if the price is too low, nobody will apply to it. So you have, as a business, you basically set a price which you think will get somebody to apply to it, and it can be any price. If you price it too low, you won't get anybody. If you price it too high, you'll get lots of people, which is good, but maybe you've priced it too high. So you're gonna kind of work it out where that sweet spot is of pricing it too high or too low. And the goal is to get employees that will do the work. Now, if you price it too low, sometimes you get not so good employees. That's just a fact. So you try to price it reasonably good, where it's sort of in between that high and low. So the point is, before the minimum wage, you figured out that sweet spot. Okay, nobody's told you what that sweet spot is, but you figured it out. It's based on the amount of work required to do that job, based on the required talents to do that job, based on what you perceive that job to be worth. So you, as a business owner, have figured out this is how much that job is worth. Now, here's where the minimum wage comes in. Now you have a government telling you that that job is worth X dollars. If it's $10 or $15 an hour, they tell you what that job is worth. Now, if you feel that job is worth only $10 an hour, and they're telling you the minimum wage is now $15 an hour, well, that becomes a very difficult situation for you, because you feel, you've sort of figured out that sweet spot, and now you have some other group telling you, hey, you're wrong, you gotta price it at this. Well, what that has done is you figured out that sweet spot, which gets the pool of talent that you're looking for. And now you're being forced to increase that pool. You're being forced to increase the number of people that are applying for that job. So what happens is the poorest people are now getting priced out of the market, because what's happening is as you've increased that pool, now you've increased the talent that can apply for that job. The better people, people with better talents can now apply for that job because it's now within their price. Talent and price always go together. So as an employer, you're going to look for the best talents. Even if it's a janitor or somebody at McDonald's. If somebody applies with a PhD, even if it's not even a required skill for that job, it's going to look better than, if you have apples to apples and somebody has a PhD or something that gives them a higher skill set. even if that skill set is not required for that job, you'll probably give it to them just because, hey, they're willing to work for it and you can get a slightly better skilled worker, you'll go for it. So what happens is the poorest people with the least number of talents and skills will be all of a sudden priced out of the market. They won't be able to get those jobs, and there'll be more people applying for those jobs. Even if they get the same proportion of the jobs, there will be less jobs for them to get because there's more people applying. Percentage of them will be lost to these other people applying. Okay, so what happens is now you've decreased the number of jobs available to the poorest people. That's the first effect. You've decreased the number of jobs that these poor people can get. The second effect is that you've now decreased not only the number of jobs that they can get, but you've caused a new effect where by increasing that minimum wage, the employer has to offset the cost. Has to. They have to make money. This is a capitalist system. Profit is essential. So when you need to create profit, there's only a certain number of tools that you have in your toolkit, and one of them is to determine how many employees to hire. So what you do is usually say, okay, well, if I have to now pay my workers, $15 an hour, well, I can only hire 3 workers instead of 4, or I can only hire this number of workers. So now I'm going to actually decrease the number of jobs even further. So now it's even less jobs that they have as potential jobs to get. Even worse is what happens is they have to still offset that cost. So what they'll do is generally increase the prices within their stores. And that price is usually hits the poorest people the hardest, because if the prices go up across board, especially because these lower income job positions are usually with services or service industries, that impacts the poorest people first, because they're very cost dependent on places like Walmart or any of the food places, or these kind of things do impact them. So you've now increased those costs, you've limited the number of jobs that are available to them, and you've increased the costs that they're now paying for within their daily expenses. So you've really hurt them. To make it even worse, the very vehicle that allows people to escape poverty is skills and talent. Skills can be acquired. Talent is based on your biology. But skills can be acquired through work. And how do you acquire skills? Well, you work. So if you're all of a sudden not getting those jobs that you used to be able to get, you're not developing your skills to improve your resume so that you can get the higher paying jobs. So not only has the minimum wage cut the number of jobs, increased the pool of people competing for those jobs, and therefore also cut the number of jobs that are available to the poorest members of our society, but they've limited the ability for people from the poorer parts of society to move up, to get the skills that they need through work, to be more talented and more skilled to move up into the workplace. If you become like a laborer for 5 years, that on a resume that looks a lot better than somebody that has no experience. So that experience on a resume is super important, and it increases your value. And these are tools that you can have to move yourself out of poverty. So the minimum wage works against the poorest people because of all these reasons. And it's one of those things that most people don't understand. And they think they're doing people a good thing by increasing the minimum wage or even having a minimum wage. But the net effect is very bad. In a capitalist system, you want to allow the market to decide the pricing. Whenever you try to inject a pricing into the market, you have these effects that I'm trying to describe now that will negatively impact the poorest members of the society. The best way to bring people out of poverty is to let the market determine the price. And I hope you hope you appreciate this, and I hope I'd love to hear comments about this topic, and I'd like to hear people's feedback about this topic, because it's one of those things that's highly misunderstood, and it's one of those things that we really should discuss, because it is so important. And if you really want our society to be a better place for all, it's all about having a free market. This is Socially Triggered. Please comment, like, and subscribe. I'd love to hear your feedback on this topic. Thanks.